conference with a lot of important change happening in Virginia, and especially this panel. I had the honor in 2020, this past legislative session, of passing SB 2, which decriminalized marijuana in Virginia, along with Delegate Charnell Herring's House version of the bill. But we know it's simply not enough to legalize cannabis in Virginia. We must legalize it equitably and immediately begin to repair the damages of prohibition. Decriminalization was a good start, but it still leaves the Commonwealth arresting upwards of 15,000 annually and spending up to $50 million in taxpayer dollars enforcing a failed policy that Virginians overwhelmingly oppose. We know that marijuana laws remain unjust and discriminatory. Despite nearly equal usage rates, Black and brown Virginians are arrested 3.5 times more than their white counterparts. Our 2020 bill sealed all records related to misdemeanor marijuana possession, but we must now work to permanently expunge those and all records related to cannabis criminalization, as well as to utilize tax revenues to support the most impacted communities. There's some talented panelists here today, and I will leave it to our talented moderator to introduce them. Nigist Abebe is a director of public policy at Columbia Care, one of the nation's leading medical cannabis companies. She serves as the president of the New York Medical Cannabis Industry Association and is on the board of the District of Columbia Cannabis Trade Association. But a Virginia resident, Nigist is no stranger to cannabis reform in Virginia, having worked with the General Assembly and for Senator Jennifer McClellan. With that, I will turn over the panel to you.
Thank you so much, Senator Eben, and thank you for the work you've been doing for many years on getting us to the point that we're on the cusp of legalization heading into the 2021 session. I'm really excited to welcome everyone to our panel, our closing panel on equity and legalization. It's my honor to introduce our illustrious team of panelists today. I'll start with Sheba Williams, who's the executive director of No Left Turns. She's been born and raised in Richmond, Virginia. No Left Turns provides direct services to returning citizens, as well as serving as an advocate for those who've been most impacted by the criminal justice system and the injustices within it. We're also joined by Majority Leader Charnell Herring, who represents sorry about this, who represents the Northern Virginia district and also is the first Black woman to serve as majority leader in the history of Virginia's General Assembly. She also carried the House version of the decriminalization bill that Senator Eben just spoke to. We're also joined by Delegate Don Scott of Portsmouth, also a member of the Courts of Justice Committee and a major champion for criminal justice reforms. And finally, Paul McLean from the Virginia Minority Cannabis Coalition, a longtime business coach and mentor and a longtime expert in business development. So thank you all for being here today. I'll start off, we're talking about equity in or equitable legalization, and that has a lot of different aspects. It's about criminal justice reforms, it's about community reinvestment in the areas that have been most impacted by prohibition, and it's about access to equity within the industry itself. So I'm going to start by opening up on expungements. Sheba, No Left Turns provides direct services for returning citizens, and you have lived experience navigating the justice system's bureaucracies. Why is it so important that expungements be included as part of this conversation? And in particular, why is it important that expungements be automatic?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me. So getting right into it, I am a person who has lived experience, has been directly impacted by incarceration for the majority of my life. I got into this work as early as the age of 10 because both of my parents were incarcerated. So I have lived the experience for the entirety of my life. Giving some history on Virginia, slavery was abolished in 1865. We know that there was a convention held in 1902, the Virginia Constitutional Convention, that for all intents and purposes was put together to develop the fundamental laws of Virginia. And the main goal was to make sure that we had as restrictive practices as possible for Black people. as slavery was abolished in 1865, we know that every law that was created, as our General Assembly meets every year, has evolved to slavery by another name. We have poll taxes, we have felony disenfranchisement, we had all of these things that came together to say that we want to disenfranchise and punitively penalize individuals who were considered less than for the majority of the past 400 years. When we're talking about all of the punitive practices, we know that there are racial barriers that say that there's inequity in every facet of the law. So as we meet to 2020, as we get to this point, we take a look at expungement and how it developed. In 1977, there was the first expungement law put on the record that said that only people who had non-convictions were eligible for expungement. It was actually written into our code, the barriers that are created by a person being charged with a crime, not just convicted of a crime, but charged with a crime. If you know your Virginia state background check contains your arrest history, not just your conviction history, you know that there are barriers to housing, education, employment, professional licensing, family foundations and structures, and all of the things that collateral consequences come with. So we evolved into mass incarceration. We said that we made some mistakes with slavery. Slavery was legal for years. And then we got to a point where we said slavery should be abolished, it should be illegal. We're at the same place in 2020 with legalization. The difference is from slavery until now, there have never been reparations and an intentional means for repairing harms to people who were impacted. We have the opportunity to get this right if we take the right approaches. So as we move into legalization and we talk about expungement in an automatic manner, because right now, the only people who are eligible for expungement are people who have been acquitted, people who have been found not guilty, people who have been victims of identity theft and can prove that they were victims of identity theft, and people who were otherwise had their cases vacated. Now, here's the problem. You get arrested. Someone accuses you of a crime. You pay a bond. We have not eliminated cash bond, as we so boastfully say in Virginia. You pay an attorney a retainer fee. You go to court 3 or 4 times, taking time off of work. You miss time from your family and your kids. And then you get into court and somebody says, well, there's no way that they could have done this crime. I have video proof or whatever proof there is to say that you're innocent. You walk out of the courtroom and you feel that you are free and you've been adjudicated by all means in saying that you didn't commit this crime. Well, guess what? It stays on your Virginia state background check. So when you go to apply for housing and employment, we're supposed to look at each case on an individual basis, and housing managers, employers say, they have this crime that they were arrested for. I see that they were not convicted of it, but they may be a danger to me hiring them or allowing them to live here. And these are the type of discriminations that happen. These people who have proven their innocence still have to go into a court, request a copy of their warrant or subpoena or indictment, pay a substantial fee, which varies from locality to locality, but it averages around $96 per person per charge. You go into Virginia State Police or into a police station and you have to be fingerprinted. Now, I don't know about you all, but it was traumatic to be fingerprinted for me. You go through that process, you wait for your fingerprints to come back, it's submitted to the court, and you still have to go back into court and have permission to go before a judge and a prosecutor to request an expungement. It's not automatically given. You have proven your innocence, but the prosecutor and the judge can get together and say, no, we're not going to remove this thing from your record. So the fact that expungement needs to be free, automatic, and far-reaching says that we have caused harms. We know that we have caused harms, and we're at a position right now where we make the decision how many people are impacted by expungement from this point forward. Right now, we only get about 4,000 applications per year for expungement by petition. There are financial barriers. There are barriers to the fact that people don't want to go into a police station or a courthouse again for something that they were not convicted of. The reasoning behind offering automatic expungement for people who have committed offenses and who have been found guilty is, one, Virginia doesn't always get it right. There are so many innocent people who took plea deals thinking that they can just do their time, pay their fines, court costs, restitutions, make it off of parole and probations without violating or reoffending, and then have this thing removed from their record. That is not the case. So we allow the country, not just the state, we allow the country to penalize people for the rest of their lives. I say to you, if we trust judges and juries to provide a means that says 5 years of jail time, 5 years of parole or probation, $5,000 in courts fines, costs, and restitution is sufficient, then why do we then take 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 100 years later and say, you can't work and make an equitable living. You can't live in a safe and affordable housing environment because of a crime that you did your stated time for. So the fact that we're looking at legalization right now, and we know that we have never made amends for harms that have been caused in the past, we are talking about making sure that people who have been incarcerated for marijuana and cannabis offenses are able to come to the table at a level playing field. We can't afford to offer expungement on the same day that we offer legalization, because guess what? There are people who are buying into an industry right now who are not allowed to come to the table because they have to wait 10 years before they're eligible to apply for licensing for different things because of past marijuana offenses.
Shiva, thank you for that. Thank you for that grounding our conversation around expungement and the history and why this is such a complicated issue. Now, Delegate Herring, I know you worked very hard to address this in the General Assembly special session this summer. Couldn't quite reach a deal then, and you're rip-roaring ready to go to bring this back up in 2021. Can you just tell us a little bit more about what you hope to accomplish and what you see as the path to the expungements?
Absolutely, and thank you for having me. And I could not agree with Shiva anymore. I mean, she has hit the hammer right on the nail's head. And it is important that Virginia pass an automatic expungement bill. Right now, criminal convictions under the decrim bill, the records are sealed, but it's certainly time for expungement. And talking about that with legalization. I just want to also point out that the bill that we tried to do, automatic expungement, that did not pass and was stopped in the Senate, was expansive. It was a crime commission bill, and that's important for people to understand, that it was actually studied as a bipartisan panel with citizen members on it who endorsed this piece of legislation. Only 2 people voted against it, a senator and 1 delegate. So this had overwhelming support. It passed the House with bipartisan support, and again, stopped in the Senate. The bill includes a lot of misdemeanor crimes and some felony drug convictions. And this was important because some people get felony drug convictions because either they take a plea, they were innocent, but they took a plea, or that it's a result of addiction. And we wanted to address the issue of addiction with this bill. So I am all for automatic expungement. People don't the process, and Shiva talked about it, of getting an expungement and all the steps that someone has to go through. I say, and members of that crime commission and members of the House say, is after someone has completed their sentence and a period has elapsed, and we had to put a time period in there. We said 8 years, which is shorter than the 10 years right now. In the General District Court for misdemeanors, the records are typically destroyed. There is no reason why anyone's record should not be automatically expunged. They should not have to retain an attorney. They should not have to go through a fingerprinting process. The whole point of our criminal justice system was to make sure that people don't have to re-enter the criminal justice system. So I think it's sort of absurd for us, or for people, to oppose something that is actually allowing people not to come back into the court. And then what happens to an individual who does come back to a court and the judge says no? So imagine that you've turned your life around, or you for 8 years you've worked hard, and then all of a sudden a judge says no. a criminal record has some consequences, means lack of access to money for education, lack of access to universities, a lack of access to housing. There are so many implications to it. And of course, with employment, as Sheba mentioned, sort of the bias that exists, even if it was just an arrest and you were acquitted of any charge. So there is absolutely no reason, again, Virginia should not do this. Virginia is ready. I am tired of politicians saying that Virginia is not ready. Maybe that individual politician's not ready, but Virginia is ready. And I will also say that Virginia, this bill had wide support from different groups, right? From conservative groups to more progressive groups. And I will tell you also, this sort of automatic expungement passed in Republican legislatures in Pennsylvania and in Michigan. So there is absolutely no reason why Virginia cannot be a leader on this issue. So I'm looking forward to working hard to get this done. Virginians deserve this.
We sure do. It's about time, and thank you for the work you've been doing for a long time to get us to this point. Now, in the cannabis space, well, we've just heard how much expungement is so much more than just a cannabis issue. It does have a specific impact on cannabis, in particular, being able to have access to business opportunities. As the stigma around cannabis has been breaking down, as we've seen more and more programs coming online in other states, the argument equity advocates have been making for a very, very long time around making sure people who were previously impacted by prohibition can participate in the industry is finally considered a norm and an expected part of a legalization process. So I'd like to invite Paul to share a little bit about what he sees and what the Virginia Minority Cannabis Coalition wants to see in policy to ensure that folks who are impacted by prohibition can benefit from legalization through opportunities inside of the industry.
Thank you, Nagist. First, I want to thank you for the opportunity to talk about this because it's something that has been a part of my life for about 10 years in terms of looking into this and following this as an industry. But when it comes to Virginia, the one thing that's important to remember is we have models with other states, but in terms of a functioning industry within the state, everything is brand new. So just keep that in mind as I go through a couple things. One of the things that we would really like to see is consistency. And when I say that, I'm talking about we would like to see social equity at the front end of the conversations at the front end of the licensing process, but also factored into the long term. We would like to see licensing with a social equity factor factored into all 5 sectors of the industry, not just the 2 most popular of dispensary, that being retail, and cultivation, which would be farming the product. The reason why is because to do this, if we can have social equity across all these different parts of the industry, it makes it more attractive to stakeholders, but really it allows the industry to have a chance to grow organically, meaning that as the businesses become more creative with targeting their customer, marketing their product, and so forth, they can become competitive, because we don't want these social equity applicants, if they have this opportunity, we don't want everyone trying to market and do their business the exact same way. The other thing when it comes to consistency, which is I really think the most important thing because it will underwrite everything that happens, is funding. The consistency of funding, because this is a new industry, new business, as well as someone potentially transitioning from not being a business owner to being a business owner. So you'll need some things in place, and I'll talk about that in a second. But when it comes to funding, there's a lot of different ways states have done this over the last decade. But if there could be some sort of capacity for there to be some sort of state funds, if for nothing else, to help the people get things started in terms of forming a full business project not just saying, I want to sell this product at that store location, but having a full snapshot of what their industry approach will be in terms of who their customer personas are going to be, what type of products they're going to offer, what price point they're going to offer the products at, where they want to be located, if delivery is available, how will they get that mechanism in place? Now, I'm saying this because if that's all part of the plan, putting together the idea, but if a lot of small businesses don't ever get a chance to put together a real business idea, they have to start because they're really stretched on capital, startup capital. But if we're going to do this, and if it's going to work, if it has to have a chance to be able to function and work correctly, everyone is going to need to have two things, in our opinion. You'll need some sort of startup capital. You can look at it as like, it would, in most business situations, it would be angel investment. And that would come from family or friends or something like that. But in this case, if it came from the state, that would make it more attractive to attract in private funding and investors to come put some money behind the state funding to power these projects, because it is an opportunity for business, but people want to be able to put their investment dollars behind something that's well thought out. The other thing, though, and this is really a key point because it hits more people and impacts more people, are multiple entry points. We really want to see multiple entry points, not just at the top of the industry, that being business ownership or operation, like as a dispensary owner or a grow farm, because there's 5 parts to the industry. There's also production, which is where your edibles and your cookies will come from, and your oils, but also testing, which is where the safety factor comes in, and distribution, which is wholesaling. But there should be other entry points and opportunities to support these entry points for just employment. Social equity-based employment would be huge because it just creates an opportunity for people to have a chance to not just compete here where they may be located in Hampton Roads per se, but to compete across the state, especially if these skills are able to be certified through training. So when it comes to employment, part-time employment is frowned upon in the industry for the most part. Full-time is more attractive because it gets all the people functioning in the business to have a vested interest, which tends to slide away from having issues with robbery and that kind of thing. But the small businesses just need the resources and the wraparound components to really be able to give them a chance to thrive, not just survive, but actually thrive in a new industry.
Paul, thanks for sharing that. And I think that point you made around wraparound services, that came up in the JLARC report, as well as the governor's work group around making sure that you don't just create a program and that people don't ever hear about or don't understand how to navigate, and that we're using the existing resources we have to equip small businesses to compete in general, to help folks enter and understand how to participate in this industry. Now, I saw coming through in the chat some questions around reinvesting some of the cannabis tax revenue into disproportionately impacted communities, which is exactly where we were heading next, to kind of touch on some of that community reinvestment fund problem, because we know that the impacts from the prohibition of cannabis led to so many other secondary effects: underfunded schools, over policing, gun violence in communities, decreased home values that divested wealth from predominantly or disproportionately Black communities. Both the governor's report and the JLARC report discussed community reinvestment funds. And Delegate Scott, if you don't mind, I'll hand off to you to talk about, like, should Virginians expect to see community reinvestment funds in cannabis legalization, and how would you like to see something like that brought to the table?
First of all, thank you for having me. That's a very good question, and I think a lot of folks know where I stand on this issue. But before I answer that, I wanted to go back to the expungement issue. I don't know if I'm the only one. I think Sheba maybe, but I think I'm one of the only few people on this call who's actually been just as involved, as we call it, been in this criminal justice system, know what it is and know what these prohibitions do to destroy lives and communities, and the stigma that you constantly have to fight, really literally for the rest of your life in every facet of your life, from licensing to job interviews to loans to housing to whatever it may be. You constantly have to go back and try to explain something that may have happened 25, 30, 35, 40 years ago. And it's really ridiculous. And for the folks who say, wait, go slow, do this, that's ridiculous. We need to do automatic expungement for a whole myriad of things that have happened in the past, and then have some petitions for other things that are more serious. We can walk and chew gum at the same time, and legalization is a big part of that. Literally, there are hundreds of thousands of people. We know that there are 22,000 arrests a year just in marijuana related, according to J-Law. 22,000 arrests a year, and African Americans, people of color, are overwhelmingly the people who are arrested. So how do you think that's impacting our lives when we don't have time, we miss court, get found guilty and absentee, or we take the first offender program and screw up and miss an appointment and get found guilty at the end of the day, and you have this record, and this follows you forever, and it doesn't matter. Now, I look at it not only as a point around the scarlet letter of a crime, which is, that's part of the stigma. But not only does it do that, more importantly, it impacts us as violent as impacting your money, your dollars, your economics, how you make a living. And that is the issue. This is how we get folks at a disadvantage. And we try to say, well, hold on, why don't they want to pick themselves up by the bootstrap? Yeah, because you've hamstrung them from being able to compete. Even if they try to get into community college, they have to say that they had this or that, and they can't get a student loan. We've stopped Pell Grants. Whatever we want to do, we use the stigma, and then we justify our actions behind it. So now I'm off my expungement thing. I had to get that off my chest because we got to get that done. That's very important. And literally, there will be hundreds of thousands of people impacted by that if we do it right. Because I visited Columbia Care niggas. I went over there and I saw that marijuana, and I was looking over my shoulder, waiting on the feds to run in and get us all. But because there was so much cannabis in there. I forgot it. We used to call it weed, cannabis in there. And so there was so much cannabis in there. I almost got high on the contact. So it was ridiculous. And I'm like, that was on Friday of last week, less than 5 miles from where I'm sitting. And then that Monday before, I'm in court and I'm seeing a young brother get sentenced to 5 years for possession with intent to distribute marijuana. Come on now. We got to stop the hypocrisy, and we got to stop it now. We can't wait 2-3 years like the J-Law study says to legalize. We have to legalize now. We have to do it in a way that's responsible, that creates tax revenue, that deals with the social equity. I know we can do this. There's a lot of smart people out here, and there are states, as Mr. McLean said, that are already doing it. Illinois, they already have a model that we can build on. They claim they have the best social equity program in the country. I say let's outdo them. Take their blueprint, steal it. Borrow it and make it better. They have one, and we can use these. There are 5 licenses that are granted to pharmaceuticals, right? And I think there's one outstanding, and it just so happens that the one that hadn't been granted yet, guess what? Surprise, surprise. There are no African-American companies that have one of these 5 medical marijuana licenses. So I think that this time we have the capability and the capacity to do it across the country. There are competent African-Americans that can do this work, and we should give them an opportunity. We're not asking for a handout or a hand up. It's the old James Brown said, I don't want nobody to give me nothing. Just open up the door. I'll get it myself. That's all we want. We don't want any help. So at the end of the day, we know we're competent and we can do it. Social equity, I think it's important that we do it right. We give folks the opportunity, and we can use the existing. We've already had these medical marijuana folks. They already up there growing weed. I saw it with my own eyes, y'all. I saw it. Who you gonna believe, me or your lying eyes? They actually we can tax them and use the revenue that they do at the beginning from the creation of those cannabis oils and or flowers, whatever you want to do, and use that money, make them pay a big lump sum, and they will fund all of our social equity programs from that while we get our revenues up to help create those impacts in the community. And they wouldn't be able to do dispensaries only for a short period of time. That's just me talking off the top of my neck right now. I'm sure there's a lot smarter people out there that could come up with a better plan. But I'm thinking if we started it now, legalize it now for recreational as soon as we can, let the folks who are already growing it do their thing, put a hard stop on them. Don't change your mind. Put a hard stop in the legislation that they have to stop and go back to the oils or infusion, or whatever, the infused products or whatever. And then we open it up to our communities. There's a way to do this, and we can get it done. I'm done.
Thanks, Delegate.
If I had a mic, I would drop
it. There were lots of snaps, and I don't know if you've seen the chat, but your remarks were extremely met with very enthusiastic reception. But I do want to hone in on one element that you raised here, and which is that gap. I think this came up earlier this morning in the conversation with Attorney General Herring, but wanted to talk about the transition period, right? Because that's something that's difficult because you do have to stand up a regulatory body, you have to figure out how to collect taxes. There's a lot of stuff that has to go into it. At the same time, we have this feeling of urgency from a lot of folks and this fear of how do we minimize the risk of any additional disparities in enforcement while we wait to stand up something. And so I'll hand it off to Delegate Scott. Please, other panelists obviously chime in as well with your thoughts on like, how do we address that interim period? Similar to the expungement point, we're gonna have to build an expungement system. That's gonna take time. So what are the things that we do while we build these things out? Because we're building expungements from scratch and we've got to build up a regulatory agency nearly from scratch. There's lots to build off of from the medical cannabis program, but there's lots more that needs to get done for an adult use program. So like I said, if you've got any thoughts on what to do in this transition time to prevent any other inequity from becoming worse, would love to hear any thoughts you've got.
I mean, Delegate Herring and Majority Leader Herring has done a lot of work in this area already. I look forward to helping her in any way that I can, and I'm not being a politician, but she's put in the work on this, and I've been assisting, and I think we both view it as a fairness issue and an equity issue, and not just minority owned and Black owned, but just for all the communities. And we know that right now, folks with money get to benefit from going in and getting expungement. They hire an attorney, they're not intimidated by the system, they can go and do it. And we know that there are other folks who can't. But when we talk about the transition plan, that's why I think it's important that we put legislation in place this cycle so that we can begin that process of building those platforms and building the opportunities within the legal system where folks can get automatic restoration. They can, if you get automatic restoration for a PWID that was on your record, PWID marijuana. Believe me, I got clients doing time for PWID marijuana, and I know niggas is about to get rich off PWID marijuana. I'm joking, but but the dispensaries are selling, and I think there's something that we need to do to wipe those charts, and we need to have I don't know what you want to call it, but those folks that are serving time for those crimes, they need to come home right now, though, and they need to be wiped clean. That can happen, you know. There's a Bible verse that says, let justice roll down like a river and righteousness like a mighty stream. We are asking people, no, we got people out here saying, no, let justice trickle down and you got to turn it on the faucet and hope a little bit come out. No, it should be rolling down. I would rather make a mistake of rolling justice down than be trickling it out. And that's what I view expungements, and that's how I view doing this social equity project. I don't think we should err on the side. If we got to do it fast and wrong, I'd rather do it fast and wrong without taking advantage of the same communities that are being harmed by it right now. Because if we continue to do what we do next July, there's still going to be young folks getting locked up for possession with intent to distribute marijuana, and we need to stop. Mm-hmm. Anybody else can add?
I will just add, I agree with my friend Delegate Scott that we do have to stop people getting arrested and going to prison or jail. That it's just absolutely ridiculous. But at the same time, I shouldn't say but, because we can do that and make sure that the market that is not the large companies that are already financed, right, and ready to go, have a piece of the market. We can make sure that those individuals who have had previous convictions have the opportunity for licensing. And I want to make sure that happens, because to me, that's part of the justice. That's part of the restorative justice piece that we need to make sure happens. So we are working, and I'm sure we're going to have a good piece of legislation come next year, come January.
I want to share that expungement isn't actually being built from the ground up. If you have a juvenile record, your record is automatically expunged and sealed once you have turned 19 and it's been 5 years since you have been crime-free. So even though our Virginia state systems are still working on MS-DOS and we're putting all of the burden on expungement to reinvent that system. We have already had a system in place that effectively expunges records. So if we feed off of what juvenile court does by not allowing public access to pending charges, and we expunge as people go out, we all know when we go to traffic court, when we get speeding tickets and all those things, that when the judge allows you to leave out of the courtroom, they enter that judgment right away and it goes straight to DMV, it goes straight on your record. It's an excuse to say that we're going to take $4.88 million to policing, to not police a system that has always and already been ineffective. When we're talking about social equity, we are talking about intentionally making room for people who have been harmed by past convictions or offenses. We are talking about, yes, we can't specifically say that we're going to give dollars to Black and brown people who have always been the brunt of criminalization. We are saying that when housing became a thing, when the Fair Housing Bill came about, we said, okay, Black people are at an equitable rate and they can buy houses and they can do it anywhere. But we all know that redlining existed. We all know that discrimination still prevented most of our Black and brown people from living in communities and having fair housing assessments. So if we're going to be intentional about social equity, if we're going to be intentional about saying that not just ownership and legalization, not just owning and running a dispensary. We're talking about HVAC systems. We're talking about electricians. We're talking about security. We're talking about realtors and real estate. We're talking about all of the ancillary businesses that come about when we're talking about making $300 million per year in Virginia for something that we have locked people up and caused them to be on parole and probation for years, indefinite. My husband was on indefinite parole after doing 18 and a half years. He was 36 years old when he came out of Department of Corrections. He went into Department of Corrections September 15th, 1992 at the age of 15 and was tried as an adult, did his time. Guess what? He came home, started a business. He's never done another crime, and he still gets asked this question on every type of application. And I'm not just talking about housing or employment or licensing, because I lost my barber's license for 16 months because of a charge that's 16 years old that I was wrongfully convicted of. I am talking about going to our children's school and being denied the ability to chaperone a child on a field trip because of a conviction that has nothing to do with the fact that these 3 children live in my home and we provide a well-balanced life for them. So it's a whole lot more than what we're talking about. If we're truly talking about getting this right, we have to connect with the Small Business Administration. And I'm not talking about those $1 million companies that have 5 employees that are coming into the business. I'm talking about true small business, 5 people who work 24 hours a day and don't take any time off to build a business with the dollars that they put their last money in. I'm talking about looking at those families and those people who put their heart, soul, and sweat into something that, like Don Scott said, we go into these facilities and we see weed stacked up to the wall and say, am I going to jail for this? We have to make people understand that they are welcome at the table, and it is no longer acceptable to keep criminalizing and penalizing a person for something that we got wrong. Virginia got it wrong. The nation got it wrong. The war on drugs started well before Governor Allen came in and said, we're going to be tough on crime. And if you listen to some of your legislators, you have to ask them when they say that they're not ready, is it because they're benefiting off of charging a person for filing that petition for them? Is it because they have a personal stake in keeping the guise of tough on crime in Virginia? Because everybody know that the economic terrorism of continuing to harm communities in a subtle manner, because you can't do it legally now, but that doesn't mean that we're in the clear. That doesn't mean that we'll just come to the gate and go to a bank and get a loan for the $150,000 that we need to buy into this business. You still can't get rid of that skin color. You still can't hide your accent or your Spanish speaking ways. You still cannot take away from the fact that who you are every day determines what you get. So if we're being intentional We set aside funding for the Minority Business Council. We set aside training. We make sure that kids aren't using. We make sure that the education is there in the community, not just for people to get into the business, but for people to be responsible. We make sure that parents are not penalized because they have a chronic health condition that requires them to use cannabis so that they're not addicted to opioids. And if we being honest, my 76-year-old granddad was diagnosed with stomach and lung cancer back in 2009. He lost so much weight, and I was living in Norfolk. My mom was his primary caregiver. I would come up every Sunday and I would have to go to a gas station because you can't find easy water anywhere else. And you can't lock me up for it because the statute of limitations has gone by. But I used to have to find easy water and roll weed for him. And that was the only thing that gave him an appetite. This is my testimony. This is my story. I have seen it. So the fact that we have criminalized this for so long can only be justified by the fact that we knew that Black and brown people would be negatively impacted by using this as a crime. Until Virginia could figure out how to capitalize off of it, just like prohibition with alcohol, until Virginia could figure out how to get the better end of this, we have allowed Black and brown people, we have allowed people who have real addictions, we have allowed people who have real substance use issues to be thrown in jail, to be processed through a system that follows you for the rest of your life. And if we are really talking about being honest and getting rid of this and doing this right, we have to look at all the past harms and how we intentionally move forward to make sure that everybody, not just Black and brown people, but everybody is able to get into this business and do it right. Mic drop.
This is a panel filled with mic drops, which should be no surprise if you're familiar with our speakers. I did want to hone in on one other thing that was raised here too, which is how we address going forward, choosing prevention over penalization. This came up in some of the work groups and other things around how do we invest, to Delegate Scott's point, how can we make this more equity centric than any other state that's come before us? One element of that is no other state has done a PSA campaign to inform people about driving under the influence as it relates to cannabis. The same way folks had to be educated about seatbelts, the same way folks had to be educated about drunk driving back in thanks to MAD and several others. For our panelists, what are some of the other elements that you see here around making sure that we don't create, again, those unintended inequities for youth enforcement, for around addiction, and some of those other elements around making sure that we're investing in systems that continue to put forward equity over penalization as a mindset, whether for youth possession enforcement or driving, again, public health education campaigns?
Well, the most important thing is not charging a youth who is caught with marijuana $150 that goes straight to Virginia State Police. If we are doing a $25 civil penalty for adults, then why are we charging a youth who ultimately it ends up falling on the parents? It ends up falling on someone who can't afford it again. So we're back in the same situation. So we have to look at where these dollars are going and why we're pushing so much of decriminalization to policing, to the courts, to these places who have always been funded. Because if we look at budgets line by line, public safety is always one of your number one costs. We put more money into public safety than we do into education. We put more money into policing and public safety than we do into any other sector that is necessary. So we've always been penalizing. How do we make sure that youth are educated? How do we make sure that communities are educated on, one, what is no longer a crime, so that we're not looking over our shoulders, so that we're not afraid to come to the table and say, this is what I want to buy into? We have to make sure that, people who are users, people who will indulge, are able to have safes in their homes and are able to lock things up so that there's no unintentional use by youth. A big thing in communities is making sure that we have the information necessary to get this right. So, in brief, The focus has to be on how we move forward in a better way for the whole Commonwealth, and not just pointing fingers and putting it out to everybody. We have to do this as a whole Commonwealth. You know, it can't just be about my family, your family, Black people, brown people. It has to be about everybody in this state if we're really going to do this effectively.
Coming back to the business end, I wanted to touch on something that Paul was hitting on around the obstacles to access to capital in this industry, which is already very hard for any business, and one of the reasons why we see so many white-owned companies, because the initial seed funding is usually coming from personal networks, and we know that due to systemic racism in this country and a variety of factors, that wealth is concentrated primarily among white Americans. And that makes it easier for white business folks to enter the cannabis industry and to use some of those informal relationships to access capital. And one of the most significant challenges that we're going to be facing and that Illinois has seen social equity applicants facing, is getting that early capital in order to be able to enter the industry. In addition to that is really understanding, like, what does success look like? Like, how do we know we've created a representative and inclusive industry? So Paul, why don't I hand it off to you to kind of just talk about, like, what do you imagine success looking like? How do you feel like we would know that Virginia had actually created an equitable industry? And then of course, open it to our other panelists.
Well, from what we've looked at, the coalition and the research, and just a lot of different ways that people can enter the industry, education available and all those things, with representation around, looking at percentage based, because of industry opportunity. The state is different in different parts. There's 5 parts of the state where you can grow, but we're looking at around 33% representation. If minorities represent 33% of this industry, it creates a new economic ecosystem that has never existed in the state of Virginia. And that goes from business ownership all the way through entry-level positions for people who would just be graduating from high school. But because of the nature of the industry, it creates opportunity where people step into an industry that pays better than most other jobs that they'd have available, which trickles into everything else like housing, pursuit of education, and all those things. So that, from our perspective, that's what we see. Funding is always important, but that's very important. That benchmark of being able to have a number, because that allows it to remain attractive to other funding sources and investors outside of the state. Because as the industry grows, there's small businesses. Those small businesses will get support from micro businesses, which might be part-time people, but they still are a key factor in the overall cannabis ecosystem that we're trying to create.
Anybody else on what does success look like, and how do we know that we've got it right 3 to 5 years from now?
And Charnel, I would just, go back for me, that I would like to see participants in the market who have had previous convictions. I mean, to see that. I know that we can't, one of the things that the JLARC report talked about was, of course, we can't do it on race, but we certainly can look at factors like convictions. And so if we see that as part of it, I will think that would be part of the success. And again, as a whole part of the restorative justice, or, making what was wrong, a little right, and bringing, and strengthening economies in certain areas of the Commonwealth, for sure.
I'll add to that. I want to see some folks become very wealthy. When you're talking about, I've heard numbers of I think what somebody said, what, $1.8 billion illicit marijuana market in the state of Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's a $1.8 billion illicit market, and we legalize it, and let's say that market stays where it is or even grows with other products and infusion products, we're talking about a lot of money for a lot of communities. And I'm hopeful, like Delegate Herring, like Majority Leader Herring said, that those folks who have been hit with the stigma can get hit with the stigma of being a millionaire for selling it now. They know the product, they know how to market it and sell it, and it's a part of, in some respects, it's a part of the culture. And also, make sure that we can document where those dollars go, whether it's earmarked for education, earmarked for early childhood education, earmarked for the PSAs, educating folks about the abuses, putting money back into youth programs. Wherever we put that money, putting a substantial amount into training new entrepreneurs who are interested in the market. As an aside, when I left and I would love to see for those folks who can demonstrate that they have a business plan and that they're serious and they've gone through some training, that they've committed to go through a training program that either the state or whoever the license authority has, that they would be eligible for a grant that they would not have to pay back. And then also to couple that grant with a loan with banks that would give them the money so they don't have to worry about making payroll. They don't have to worry about distribution. And then those people who work hard, who put in the work, who can connect with their customers, they'd be successful. To me, that's what success looks like. That's part of the American dream. Those folks who work hard and get a fair shot. And if they succeed on their own, then they'll do well. Everybody who thinks they can be in this market can't be in this market, because that's like anything else. It's how you connect with customers. It's customer service. It's about how you manage your package, distribute your product. How do you let folks know? I was in California and I was looking around and I saw there's one or two people out there that's just killing it. It's legal. A lot of people can do it, but there's a couple of people that are just killing it because they've created a culture around it. They're selling other products besides just cannabis. They're selling backpacks and hats and shirts and shoes and belts and everything. They created a lifestyle around the product that they're selling. And so I can see that somebody young, hip, a young, a 14, 15-year-old up and coming Pharrell right now that he doesn't even know he's Pharrell, but he gets into this thing and he becomes that guy and takes over and reaches into all aspects of the culture, or that girl, and she reaches all throughout the culture. So I'm thinking, we need to look at it from that perspective. And I think success looks like, we'll know when we succeeded that there'll be some folks who've done very well in the market, in their communities, in the state of Virginia. It's a $1.8 billion market. We ought to be able to create a whole lot of Black millionaires. That's my thing. Thank you.
Shiva, you want anything else about what success looks like?
Not having prisons and jails, locking people up for this. I'm an abolitionist at heart, so you all know that is my answer. But making sure that we are not continually penalizing people for things that we stand to make millions and billions of dollars off of later. And as people come home, as people are being released from these charges and given relief by expungement, automatic expungement, that I am speaking into existence, because we know that it's going to be an uphill battle with people who say, oh no, we don't think that violent offenders should do their time and pay all their fines, court cost, restitution, and then be given relief. I am saying that these are people too. 95% of people who go into our carceral systems are released back into our communities. They are our brothers, sisters, husbands, wives, neighbors. They are our co-workers. They are people who you would not believe. And we have to uplift these people. We can't just be selfishly thinking about this. So success looks like making sure that my neighbor is able to come into this business just as I am, making sure that, our economy is growing, making sure that we are not still funneling Black and brown people into the court systems and unjustly overpopulating prisons and jails with these people. We have to make sure that we are not looking at another way to cause harms. And what I said was slavery by another name, because we all know that Jim Crowism evolved into, mass incarceration and parole and probation trap and things like that. So we have to make sure that we are benefiting people. We are making sure that we're benefiting the economy, and we are not keeping people out of the loop. So in 5 years, like I said, we hope to see a whole lot of millionaires. We hope to see that people are giving back into the community, and our education system leads the nation. We are hoping that our education system benefits from a lot of this tax revenue, because we have been lagging behind for far too long. And if we are going to make all of this money off of cannabis, then it's high time that we look at education as the number one priority in our states, to make sure that people grow into the people that they want to be. So as we go through these reforms of these criminal legal systems and these juvenile legal systems, we have to make sure that we are not creating another pathway to do another harm by another name, by disenfranchising people out of this business and making it look the way that it looks today. It has to be more diverse. We have to change the landscape. We have to be more intentional about making sure that people who may not have the resources to buy in right now are able to come to the table and get those resources without going through hoops and boundaries and burdens of being into this system. So success will be seeing an average everyday person who has been incarcerated for marijuana offenses being at the head of the table of cannabis industries 5 years from now.
Thanks, folks. I'm going to do a lightning round of responding to some questions that came up in the chat, and then hand it off to everybody to make one last kind of final remark to address anything that we didn't get to yet. So really quickly, for some folks here, as it relates to having this state-sponsored franchises, JLARC did a nice little bit in their report about why you can't have a state monopoly for cannabis businesses, especially under federal prohibition, as well as the obstacles to achieving equity through that model. In response to some of the questions around a delivery service, there's still a lot to see and learn about what's going on with delivery and those types of license models in proposed legislation. And then lastly, a few folks have chimed in about how to stay informed and where to go for more information. Jen Michelle Padini, the executive director of Virginia Normal, has already dropped in, and I'll ask them to drop in again. The link to Virginia Normal one, you can find links and information about the reports that have been issued, as well as other news updates, and also stay in touch around action alerts and other activities heading into this session in order to address not just adult use, expungements, and also some of the inequities in the medical cannabis market right now. So with that, I'm going to turn over for a lightning round of just final thoughts from our panelists, anything that I didn't tee up for you or something you want to double down on in these last 4 minutes. So it's about 60 seconds each for your final thoughts. I'm going to go ahead and tee up with Majority Leader Herring to go first.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me again and on this panel. And I am just so glad I'm just going to have to get personal to know Sheba. I I've met you now. I've been with you twice, when we were preparing for this. Your voice is so needed. And your advocacy is just incredible. And I'm glad that we are here in this space in Virginia, this time, this moment of history, where I think that we are certainly making a shift and talking more about justice and in a holistic way. And so I'm just looking forward to the work ahead and getting that automatic expungement done. I can't say enough about it. For me, it's a moral issue, it's a spiritual issue about redemption, and that we should be uplifting people. So thanks again so much, and I look forward to the work ahead on legalization.
Thanks. Sheba?
So we need you all. We need you all in the audience. We need your family members. We need you to take this to your churches. We need you all to talk to your legislators who are not on board, because we are here and we are on board, but there are people who are fighting to keep these same rules of white supremacy in place. Reparations are due. Reparations are past due. We have paid reparations and we have done $1 million funds from everything from 9/11 to the Holocaust, to the Coleman bombing, to Tommy the dog being killed. And when we talk about slavery, when we talk about Black people who have been harmed by housing projects, redlining, destroying communities that have made the economic challenge and uplifted each other, burning down, the Tulsa burning, all of these things, even Jackson War, reparations are past due. So we're not asking for you to come and give us a $1,200 stimulus check that is supposed to last for over 12 months. We're talking about paying into these businesses and making sure that these people are able to come to the table with real impact, with real voices. So when we're talking about getting past this first hurdle, we need everybody who agrees that doing your time, doing your stated time is enough. We need you to talk to your legislators and tell them that you believe in forgiveness and second chances, because they don't believe that we have the power. Legislators work for us. Delegate Scott, Senator Evans, Leader Herring, they get it. But guess what? There are 100 and some plus other legislators who say, we're not ready. We're not going to budge on this. Special session came and we had all of these harms that came up over the summer. We had people marching in the streets. We saw the pain. And the crazy thing is, as Black people, we have seen this pain well before George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. We have seen this pain time and time again, but people paid attention in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of racial uprising. They still came to the table and said, we're not going to vote on this because we're not ready. We have been well past ready. When I paid my last dollar to Henrico County Circuit Court, I was ready, but instead I was kept away from my family. I was told that I couldn't have my barber's license for 16 months. I was fired from a job that I spent every day working 12-hour shifts at for 10 years. And guess what? When they found out about my conviction that happened after I was hired, so I didn't lie on my application. They said, you know what? You have been great. You have built this unit up, but you got to go, because Medicaid doesn't allow a person with a felony to work. So we need you all to step in. If you've never been impacted by these systems, we need you all to speak up. Speak to somebody who has been through these systems and talk to them about, they love their kids the same way that you love your kids. They love their mothers and fathers and their neighbors the same way that you love your mothers and fathers and neighbors. And do you feel more comfortable making sure that opportunity is there for them? Or do you think that crime is more susceptible to being committed if you are put in fight or flight mode and not given the opportunity to be a whole citizen again? We need your voices to talk to these people who have never been impacted by a system and tell them what people deserve in Virginia.
Thanks, Sheba. I'll hand it off to Paul and I'll let Delegate Scott have the final word.
I mean, man,
Paul?
there's not much you can say after that. That was powerful. I just wanted to say, to let people know, you can follow us on Twitter at VMCC Equity 33. That's Virginia Minority Cannabis Coalition Equity 33. But in closing, I just wanted to talk about our coalition has been looking at kind of providing some of those things Mr. Scott was talking about in terms of the training and support. And I wanted to let people know that after the first of the year, we will begin putting out that content to make people aware of the education resources, the public awareness campaign, the training seminars, and that format. Just got to get through the end of the year first. But this was a powerful thing, and I'm looking forward to doing as much as we possibly can before the end of the year and doing big things going forward.
Thanks, Paul. And then Delegate Scott?
Yes, thank you again for having me. This has been outstanding. I guess a couple of things I wanted to say to give folks a thought process on what it is. I mean, when you have been impacted by this system, you have to think about, I don't care what your race is, you got to think about how you're going to survive, how you're going to make a living, how you're going to support your family and yourself, where you're going to live, how you're going to eat, what kind of work you're going to do. Ms. Sheba Williams was just talking about how that impacts you. That's the anxiety that you feel. Can you make it? Will people give you an opportunity? Then the second chance is, so that's the justice side of it, the equity side. Do we give folks an opportunity who've done everything right to come home and do what they need to do? And do we even put people in jail for some of the stuff that we've criminalized? Those are the two things that we're battling about. That's what the abolitionists talk about, and that's what our society talks about as far as equity, and that's what Majority Leader Herring is fighting for, along with a lot of others around expungement and automatic expungement, that equity side, that justice side. That's the romantic side of me. The other side of me is the money side. Romance, justice. Finance. Romance without finance is a nuisance. We need to have all of it. So don't be getting upset when we talk about we want the justice side, and we want equity, and we want fairness, and we want justice. And then you don't want us to ask about the money. We're going to ask about both. And that's what we're going to be doing in this situation as we move forward. We're talking about, we want justice, but we also want to make sure that we're getting our piece of the pie, that from the bottom to the top, that we're involved with cultivation, distribution, warehousing, the whole 9 yards, retail, dispensary, taxing. I know Sheba Williams, I wanted to say Senator Williams, Sheba Williams, who has that politician side of her. I know she was talking about some of those things, but we have to have compliance. I think people mix up enforcement with compliance. And so I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about law enforcement so much. I want to talk about making sure that we have compliance so that then we're not ending up with people getting duped into buying an inferior product, an unsafe product. So we need to focus on compliance in this new industry. And I don't care about so much about the law enforcement side. I'm more concerned about the compliance side. But I definitely don't get it twisted. Romance, finance, then you don't have a nuisance. So we got to do both. All right, because romance without finance is a nuisance, as my wife told me when we were dating. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Scott, for another delightful pearl of wisdom. Well, that concludes our panel for this afternoon and also the conference. I'm going to hand it back over to Ben to make some final remarks for the conference as a whole. Thank you, folks.
Yeah, thank you, Nigas. Thank you, Sheba, Paul, Delegate Scott, Majority Leader Herring. Personally, I'm feeling very inspired by today's conversation. So I'm looking forward to seeing Virginia lead the way on these issues. It's hard to believe, but as Nigas mentioned, we've reached the end of this series, Legalize It, the Path to Cannabis Equity in Virginia. We hope that you all will share recordings from the past 2 days from our YouTube channel, and that you'll continue the conversation in Slack and in the networking lounge, which will remain open until 3 p.m. Thank you, Virginia Normal, for your leadership in the space, and Columbia Care and Jushi for your support of the series itself. Hope you all have a great afternoon, and we'll see you next time.